Hey all, g'day, thank you. Thanks for coming and listening to me. If you've met me before, there's a few familiar faces here, but if you haven't met me, you may know me. I'm the developer of Base Elements. That makes me most familiar. I'm from Melbourne, Australia. It was 38 hours from leaving my house to arriving at the hotel here. A long haul 18-hour flight from Perth to London. It's my first time in Europe since I was a kid, so it's been really good, enjoying it. So what are we doing today? What this session really is about is to try to impress on you that Linux is not only valuable to us as FileMaker developers, but that it's also easy and it's simple and we can do all the things. If you've run Linux before, if you've run a Linux server, I'm not going to teach you anything you don't know, so I won't mind if you duck out. But if you haven't run Linux before, what I'm hoping is that you go home, you install a VM and you start playing with Linux as a server, because it is actually easy and there's a lot that we can learn for it. So as a command line OS, you know, the idea that it's not point and click seems sort of antithetical to FileMaker developers. You know, we like our point and clicks, but it's not something that we should be scared about. So first of all, why choose Linux? It runs on a mountain of hardware. You can have a Linux server the size of a matchbox that runs off a USB 5-watt plug and nothing else, and you can run Linux and FileMaker server on that. You can run Linux on your machine at home, you can run machines in the cloud, you can do it in all sorts of places. I've got there as well a more focused OS. I couldn't really come up with a better description of what I mean by that, but it's just this idea that you install Linux and it does nothing, and then you install FileMaker and it just does FileMaker, and that's all it does. Things like Mac, things like Windows, if you go into the services options in Windows, you're going to see 1,000 different things that you don't understand that are running, that are taking up space, and give you things that you need to patch and manage and look after. One of the things too that I find amazing about Linux as an OS is the automation stuff that you can do with it. Even though it's command line, there's a whole heap of things that you can make happen automatically. It's really cool. There's a lot of options there. I could do a whole session on the automation stuff you can do with a Linux server. And you can build up as much UI as you want and you need as FileMaker developers. Why does a FileMaker developer choose Linux? Price is a massive thing. You can have a $0 operating system. I did a version of this talk back in Sydney a couple of months ago, and a guy came up to me afterwards and said, "So do you mean I don't have to pay my $25,000 Windows server license if I install Linux?" And I'm like, no, there is no $25,000 Linux install license. And I've got their high focus for Claris, a bit of a question mark. Like, we went through the Claris platform stuff and it was Linux only, and obviously that's changed, but it really is a focus. You can see with what was talked about, the port mapping stuff, that's a Linux only feature to start with. So, you know, Claris as a platform is really using Linux and pushing all its advantages and using it in lots of ways. So it's useful for us as Claris developers to get on that platform. And like I said, it gives us lots and lots of choices, places to run, locations, different hardware, different things. So if you're choosing Linux and you want to get up and running with it, where do you start? First choice, you've got to pick some hardware. You can install Linux over the top of your whatever operating system, your Mac, your Windows. You uninstall Windows or replace Mac with Linux. It's a complicated option, and it's probably not the best way to get into it, and it's probably not useful for the sorts of things that us as developers are going to do. The second one is the virtual machine, and obviously this is super common these days, things like Parallels or VirtualBox. That software lets you run other OSs, including in Linux. So you can start up a Mac, or you can be running on a Mac and run Parallels and start a little operating system, Linux, install it, get it up and going, run FileMaker on it, and then when you've had enough, just delete it and it's gone. And it hasn't touched your operating system, it hasn't touched the rest of your computer, you haven't broken anything, you haven't done anything, you can trial out new versions. It's a really cool way to start playing with Linux and start trialing different things. You can run the ARM version on an ARM Mac, you could also run the Intel version through the words escape me. But yeah, you can run both different OSs and things like that. The other thing is that you can run it in the cloud. So cloud hosting, a lot of the cloud hosting options are Linux, and everything that you've learned when you learned and you played with Linux in your virtual machine, you can also apply to the cloud. They're the same same operating system, same examples, same things you're going to learn. You're going to connect to them and use them in the exact same way. So everything you learn about Linux as a desktop, in a virtual machine environment, when you're playing with it, you'll end up doing the same thing, and the skills that you have will transfer. The second choice, there's a long list of choices you can pick for which operating system you can go with. So FileMaker does actually support Ubuntu 20, but there is absolutely no reason to use it. So there is only one choice, Ubuntu. It's a great choice as an operating system for Linux. There's a whole heap of other flavors of Linux, but basically Ubuntu is what FileMaker supports, so it's what we've got. Version 22, like I say, don't bother picking version 20. There's no point. There's nothing advantageous about picking 20 over 22. 22 is more recent. The other thing that comes in there is LTS. If you're not familiar with it, what it means is long-term support. So that that version will receive patches and updates for 5 years. So you know that you're going to have an operating system that's secure, that's updated for all the security issues for 5 years. If you want, you can join the Ubuntu support program and get a further 5 years, so 10 in total. Meaning that you can install something today and still have it running in 8, 9, 10 years time. And that's really, it's a real advantage. If you think about today, things like Mac OS, you get patches for the current version and the one previous, and that's it. And new versions of Mac OS come out every year. So you really don't have a long time window. We don't have a lot of stability anymore in terms of operating systems around the Mac and Windows that we compared to what we have with Linux. The other point there is server. There are two flavors of Ubuntu. There's a desktop version and a server version. There is absolutely no reason for you to install the desktop version. It comes with a whole heap of things you don't need and you won't use. I know that as user interface people, we look at things and we want a nice point and click. I love a good point and click interface for things. I will add, for some of our servers, I will add a tool called WebMin to be able to do administration. It's really nice. It does a web-based, it's a command line thing to install, but then gives you a web-based thing to manage your FileMaker servers. You don't need to use the desktop thing at all. So what I'm going to do today, the idea around Linux is that there's a lot I need to learn. There's a whole raft of things that I need to learn in order to become a proficient Linux user. Turns out that's not the case. I'm going to teach you 6 things. They're basically everything you need to know to get up and running. We're going to do SSH, which is how you connect to a server, sudo, which is how you authorize. We're going to do apt, which is how you install software, ls for seeing what files are in which directories, chown for changing permissions, and service to stop and start FileMaker server. So, thing 1, you've picked a virtual machine, you've installed Linux, you've got it up and running. What do we do? How do we connect to it? You just go into it, you can basically hide the virtual machine app. You don't need to access it, you don't need to type into it, you don't need to do any of that. Go and open up a terminal and you type SSH user at server. If it's a virtual machine on your local machine, it will have an IP address, and so you just type user, whatever your username was when you did the install, and the IP address, and that gets you connected. The other interesting thing, though, is that same protocol that you're using, the SSH one, is also the same thing you're going to use as SFTP. So the first thing you're going to want to do is install FileMaker on it. Well, how do I get the installer onto my virtual machine? Well, I open up a file transfer program, something like Transmit on the Mac or FileZilla on Windows. We sort of consider them FTP clients, but they're file transfer clients. Before, Mike Beege mentioned CyberDuck that he uses, does the same thing. And so you go into that and you say, I want to connect to a server. You pick the SFTP protocol, you put in your username and the IP address, and you hit go. And now you've got the ability to connect to that server to pull files off the server when you're pulling FileMaker files, or to drop things onto the server, for example, the FileMaker installer. So that's all you need to know. Like, you've got now your command line, and I've got my ability to access the files. It is really critical to know, though, that SFTP, even though it contains FTP, is not FTP. FTP is a really old protocol. It's bad, and you shouldn't be using FTP. It changes, for example, it sends your username and password in the clear over the network. So anything listening onto your network knows your username and password. They added security on top of FTP, which is how you get FTPS. But none of those things are SFTP. So if you see it, it's sort of critical to understand, but when you're connecting to these servers, when you're using SSH, which is secure shell, that also gives you option to do SFTP. So we've built our server, we've got our VM, or we've applied for our account at the cloud hosting provider, and we've got our server. We can connect to it, we can send files to it, so we can drag and drop the FileMaker, install it to it. Now what? Once we're connected, things 2 and 3. And I'm going to do these together because they have to come together. Sudo and apt. Sudo is super user do. It's how you get administrator permissions on a Linux box. So on a Mac, what you would do was you'd do some sort of action and it would say, I can't do this action without permissions, and will put up the dialog and ask you to put in your password. On Linux, it works the other way. You have to ask for permission first. So you have to put sudo at the start of the commands that you run. If you do it without sudo, it will probably it won't tell you you can't do this without permissions. It will probably just throw weird errors and you'll not understand what it is that you're doing wrong. The top one is how you get FileMaker installed. So we do sudo and then we do apt. Apt is the package management. Essentially, you can treat it as the software installer, updater, all those things all in one. And so we say to sudo, we're going to say sudo apt. So that's going to tell us we want advanced permissions and install. And dot means the local directory, and FileMaker server, that's that installer file that we drag and drop through our file transfer earlier. And that's it. From those 2 things that we've done, you will have a running FileMaker server. And that you can close down your terminal, you can open up the web browser, connect to the admin console, and you're up and running. A couple of other ones there in that list, sudo app update, that's essentially to say, check on the internet to see if there's any updates that I need to install. The third one is upgrade, does essentially, all right, those updates that you found, go and install them now. So those 2 things I run quite a bit. The other ones you probably will never use, remove. I always forget whether it's remove because I'm always thinking in my head as a Mac user, I'm thinking of delete. So is it delete? And what I end up usually doing is going Google, Ubuntu, uninstall software, and it'll tell me which it is. Auto remove is just another one there that's like a cleanup thing. So if you uninstalled FileMaker server, FileMaker server has a bunch of dependencies that it installs as well, and the auto remove just cleans up and gets rid of anything. But most of all, you're probably not going to use that. If you're doing this sort of thing on a virtual machine, or you're doing it in a cloud host, if you do something and you break the machine, you ruin things, just start up another one, delete it, and can it and start from scratch. So it's almost never that you end up doing these kind of things. At this point though, you've got everything. You've created the virtual machine, you've connected to it, and you've done the install and you've done the setup and you've done FileMaker server. Now you're all going to use the same tools you already know, the administration console. You're going to use FileMaker Pro to upload and download files. You've got everything you need. I've only done 3 of my 6 things, so I'm going to give you 3 more things. So we've done 3 so far, SSH, sudo, and apt. Things 4 and 5. First one, ls-al. ls is the equivalent to the dir command on Windows, gives you a directory listing. I almost always use -al. It's the options essentially to give you more options to see more. If you just do ls, you get a list of file names. If you do ls-al, it tells you modification dates, how big the file is, and the user and the group that it belongs to. It's just super handy for looking at things on a FileMaker server and on Linux in particular. The other one is chown, and essentially means change ownership. So the way you use that is that you come across permissions issues on the Mac. You can come across them in a sort of slightly different way on Windows. But Linux is very structured, and if the file that you put on the server isn't owned by the FileMaker user, the FileMaker server user, you won't have access to it and you won't be able to do anything with it. So chown is changing ownership. And the way you use that is just a command that says, again, sudo, because I want permissions, and chown, and fm server is the user, fms admin is the group, -r is recursion, and then the path. And so, FileMaker is installed in /opt/FileMaker/FileMaker server. So you can just run that, and basically what that says is fix all the permissions in the entire folder for me. I'm not going to worry about whether it's good or not or anything. Question? Yeah, I was going to do that, yeah. So the -r, again, the thing about the Linux, the -r capital versus -r lowercase makes a difference. It is a different thing. I don't remember all of these options. I don't remember that for this particular command, it's capital versus lowercase. I usually Google these, or I have a cheat sheet where I keep a list of things. Sorry? Yeah, or you use Webmin, yeah. I will give you my cheat sheet that contains all of this, so no need to worry about writing down and remembering all of these. There's also a really cool one that comes from Ubuntu. They give you a single page PDF with a whole bunch of things that you can learn and get up and going. The thing 6 that I'm going to teach you is the service. It's basically how you stop and start FileMaker. So sudo service FMS helper is the name of the install, the starting point that runs all the other services, and then stop and start. So FMS helper, when you stop FileMaker server from the admin console, so these days now we've got the new admin console where you can still see the admin console, you can stop FileMaker server and it puts up a little red bar to say that the database server's stopped. That's really cool. This goes that one step further and closes down the service that runs that. So it's like a turn everything off kind of command. The one place you will need this is when you're doing updates. And so basically what you do when you're doing an update of FileMaker on Linux, connect up in your file transfer client, drop the new version of the server installer, FileMaker server installer into the file. You type sudo service helper stop. You run the exact same install command with the new file that you had before, and that's it. And I've done this on Linux servers, and it is literally a 5-minute process. It works all the time, doesn't require you to do reboots to the OS or anything like that. It just works, it's quick, and it's easy, and it's really handy. The installer picks up that you've got a previous version of FileMaker installed and doesn't replace it for any of your settings. Yeah?
Somebody told me that if you do the update, so it means you don't have to stop it, launch it again, that it would stop FileMaker server itself.
The update does?
I was actually submitting a bug for the Mac.
Yep.
Where it says like stop the server and blah blah blah.
Okay.
Somebody saying like on Linux, if you updated it, it does it automatically. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But it could be that even works.
Yeah. Look, I mean, I'm cautious about these things. I like to know that, you know, I will do the thing of connecting to the admin console beforehand, closing all the files, making sure they're all closed, then running this command. But yeah, you know, I'm not sure. I haven't played with that. Yeah.
During these commands, will it gracefully shut down the running databases?
Yes, it does. Yes. Yeah. But say you'd be better off, you know, peace of mind, making sure things are shut down before you run any of these things. I would do it that way. That command, those 6, essentially that's the nuts and bolts of what you need to know. You've now learnt enough. You run a virtual machine, you can try that out. You can give yourself a server setup that you can try. New versions of FileMaker come out and you want to try them, you can put that on your local machine. So you install a little VM, say in the office on your machine, people can access that. It can have its own IP address, so people can access that. You could have 3, 10, whatever Linux or Windows virtual machines running and access them all. And those 6 commands. So it is simpler than you think. Linux seems daunting, but there's not much that as FileMaker developers we need to know. The complex stuff in this is easy to find out. And you can, you know, like I said before, I don't remember whether that's a capital R or a small case R. I don't remember whether it's remove or delete. But Google, you know, Ubuntu has heaps and heaps of documentation for this sort of stuff. The other thing too, it really does benefit everyone to learn this platform because we, you know, FileMaker, Claris are doing things that are Linux only, but also the things that you're doing as developers, you're pushing the boundaries, trying new things, working out how to do stuff. There's more that you can do on Linux, and so as a benefit, there's lots of advantages for us as FileMaker developers. And really, there's only 6 commands you need to know. That's everything you'll get up and running. Once you've done that first terminal, you've connected, you've done the install, you close out terminal and you go on using it like it was any other server. It doesn't appear to be any different than any other. It's okay to forget the commands, and yes, I will send you my cheat sheet. Yeah.
Is there a standard location for the FMCert file?
The
FMCert file, the certification file. Or you just install a trial version and insert
And then you just do it via the admin console. Yeah. So FileMaker, will it pick up in the same folder?
No, you need to enter another command in order to point to the assisted install.
Yeah, you have the assisted install.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so you can do, I don't know if any of you have played with it, the insisted install that you can do on Mac and Windows also works on Linux, and so you'd use that to say, here's the assisted install file, and that contains a link to the cert file, contains all your logins and other bits and pieces as well, yeah. Yes.
Nick, sorry, just beforehand,
Yep.
are the standard FMS admin instructions still running
Yes.
as they... Thanks.
Yep. And you don't need to be any sort of special permissions to run FMS admin. The normal user account, so you don't need to do sudo to do FMS admin, and then it will ask you for the admin console permissions. Yep, yep. And so it'll just work. There's no special tricks, changing folders or anything. Just open up the terminal, SSH, and then FMS admin. Yep, yep.
How about fonts? Fonts,
So,
typefaces.
Yeah. So you can. We did a bunch of things with, for example, we've done some stuff with a tool, a command line tool called Ghost Script. So it lets you generate PDFs from HTML files, for example. So we do some stuff where you're calling out to Ghost Script to generate things. So that comes with a whole heap of open source fonts, and it has differently named fonts that match most of the local ones. So for most of it, you're just using it as a FileMaker server, so it doesn't matter too much. FileMaker still behaves the same way. It's going to render locally in FileMaker Pro the things that your local OS, and so it won't care so much. It's only in those weird things, like if you're doing that sort of Go script stuff, like I was talking about, that it matters. But there's a mountain of fonts that you can get. Mostly ones that match fairly similar things. Yeah.
My first installation of FileMaker Server on Ubuntu. One thing you haven't mentioned here is how to do the network setting. So I like Webmin.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah,
so as I was used to, I installed Webmin first to take care of the network settings.
Yep.
And then I installed the FileMaker server, and then it collided.
Oh, okay.
But I don't remember. So I've continued with that procedure by uninstalling the Webmin after doing what I needed to do.
Yep.
But I think that after that, FileMaker changed to EngageU. So is it possible now, as you suggest, to keep the Webmin, have the Webmin running?
Yep. I think I'm fairly certain Webmin has its own little server, and it runs on port 10,000.
I don't know why, because it collided.
Okay.
It refused to run.
Yeah,
Okay,
perhaps,
so
yeah.
that's a good thing. You can keep your Webmin.
Yeah.
Thank you. That was my
the
question.
example with Webmin, one of the things we use that for is we have another thing called REST-FM, which is a PHP framework for simplifying the data API. And so we have a single Linux server, and I install Webmin, and that lets me create as many virtual domains on that one server as I want. So we have about 20 different domains, 20 different installs of REST-FM. And so to create a domain using Webmin, I just go in, I go add a domain, type out the name, and say hit create, and it goes away and does all the work, creates all the folders, installs all the stuff, gets a Let's Encrypt certificate for me, so I've got SSL on that server, and then I'm up and going. So yeah, really cool and handy, and it means like you don't need the whole desktop version of Linux to do that, because you're just doing that in a browser remotely from wherever the server happens to be. Yeah.
Unless you're installing second, not the working machine.
A secondary.
The
Yeah.
secondary, right.
Yeah. Yes.
Then you need
Yeah.
the Java.
Yeah.
I just wanted to add that my experience, whenever I go through this, you have said we are visual people, and
Yep.
blinking cursor on an empty screen can be scary.
Yep.
I always add some file manager like Midnight Commander to the
Okay.
formula.
Yeah.
So, and then you're right away at home. You see all your files. You can browse them. You can look at the config files right away. So
Yeah.
that's a big help, I think.
Yeah, yeah, and that's the same thing. It's that concept of understanding the SSH is the protocol, SFTP is the same thing essentially, but you're just doing file browsing over it. So, you go, oh, the first thing you think about when I think there's this empty box that is a command line, blinking cursor. Well, how do I do anything with this? What do I do? How do I get files onto it? How do I download my FileMaker files? How do I pull the backup off? Well, just pull out whichever file browser software you like, and you can get up and running that way. And it is you can go in and you can see the folders, you can see the structures, and it's really easy to get things up and going. If you need to configure something with a file on that server, you can pull that file out. You can read it in your file transfer application and see what's going on and do things that way. Yeah.
I'm not sure if this is the time and the place, but I would like to expand on the fonts question.
Yep.
So I'm rendering this PDF on the Linux server.
Yep.
Using a Verdana font, but
Yep.
it looks considerably different than when I do it on the Mac.
Yes. Yes.
Is it this something that I should do different, or is it a known thing?
No, it's. I don't know. I'm not sure what fonts the FileMaker server will install. I don't think it includes much. It will look different. If you do a server-side PDF generation on a Linux server, it will look different than if you did the server-side PDF generation on a Windows with different fonts.
I have installed all kinds of
Yep.
possible fonts, including Verdana, on
You're
the
right.
Linux server.
Yep.
But still.
It still goes weird.
Mhm.
Not sure. I can.
It's not using it.
Yeah.
It's not using the font.
It looks like it is not using the font right. It more looks like an Arial font, or, well, I'm improvising now, but it's like there's no match really.
Yeah. There's a whole thing you can do around dependencies with fonts as well. So you can map. There's a font mapping thing where you can say, if you see this font, use this one instead. So there's probably an answer to that question. Might take a bit of investigating though. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Are there
Okay.
different font locations?
I'm not sure. Not off the top of my head. Yeah. There's a couple of questions behind as well.
For the fonts, I would recommend to Google for updating font cache on Linux,
Yep.
because there's a command line tool to do that.
Yep.
I had that very same remark first on font, and second, I think there's a known bug. Because first, if it does not use the font, then the font cache will probably be the problem. But we have the problem with bold rendering of a font, but that appears to be a known problem on Linux as well. And a third thing I want to add for a suggestion, a tool that we use for SSH connections and SFTP connections is Termius. I don't know if anyone uses that, but if you manage a lot of servers, it comes in really handy. You can configure your AWS key in it and reuse it and things like that.
Yeah, I didn't go into it, but you can get more detailed. So with the SSH stuff, we connect. We don't use usernames and passwords. We have private keys, so you can connect to it with a key. We run about 30 servers, almost all of them Linux, and I don't remember usernames and IP addresses. So there's shortcuts and things. So if I want to connect to a client called Egans, I'll just type SSH Egans. And it connects me because it knows that Egans is mapped to all those things. So there's all sorts of stuff you can do once you get started, once you get a bit familiar with it. There's a heap more stuff you can learn.
Nick?
But yeah.
About the font thing. It could be like a font ID issue, of course.
Yeah.
So
what he could do, for example, Adobe fonts on all platforms where he makes it, and then he's in the same shop.
Yep.
I mean, a lot of people have problems with, for example, installing Microsoft Office, and then they have a second set of fonts, and then they get font issues with the rest of the system.
Yep.
So it could be if you just go for a commercial font and use that consistently over your platforms, then you're able to make the PDF and print it. Probably you can print it perfectly then.
Yep.
It's maybe something you can try, but it will cost you, of course.